Hello, welcome back. Today we have an interesting one. This one is a German film. We haven't had a German film since Witches Tortured Till They Bleed, which I probably made that video a year ago. That was the only primarily German horror film of 1970. It was produced by Agila Films, and so was this one. So this was directed by Freddie Francis. You might remember Freddie Francis is the British, English film director who did movies for Hammer. He did movies for Amicus. He did, this is his 17th film. He did two 1970 horror movies. One was Mumsy, Sunny, Nanny, and Girly, which I liked a lot. Another one was Trog, which I didn't like as much. So he did those two in 1970. Then in 1971, he made a German film. This film is called, or translates to, They Only Bite at Night, The Vampire Happening. Released in English-speaking countries as The Vampire Happening. And if you take a look at the difference in posters here, this is the German poster. It's a horror comedy, which I don't think we had any horror comedies in 1970. Horror comedies had existed before. They were never super popular before this. And this is not only a horror comedy, but a vampire horror sex comedy. So it's actually an extremely unique movie. I haven't seen every single movie of the 60s. I'm sure there were no sex movies in the 50s or earlier. And from some research that I was doing, sex wasn't big in movies until the late 60s. I know pornography was illegal until at least 1969. Then we covered every movie in 1970, and there were a few sex horror-ish films, such as the films by Jesus Franco, which were, they were more sex films than horror films. I think we had a couple of these like sadomasochist films in 1970 and a couple in 1969. I don't think that there were a whole bunch before that. But I could be a little bit off, but I'm pretty sure that this is a really new thing. As far as sex comedies go, I'm not sure there were any before this. I'm gonna have to do some more research, but I did one time see an interview with Lloyd Kaufman, who was talking about how he basically made like some of the first sex comedies, and that was in the late 70s. He made Squeeze Play in like 1978. Which is not even a good movie, but it's like a softball themed sex comedy. And like later in the early 80s was Porky's, which was a big one. And I saw this thing saying, Porky's was influenced by the early Lloyd Kaufman sex comedies. Those didn't really start till the late 70s. So this one's all the way back in 1971. So I think it's pretty important. This is quite an obscure movie if you kind of like look it up. Not too many people have in recent times have really talked about it. If you scour YouTube, you'll find one other recent video citing that it is a bad movie. It's a bad movie review channel. I didn't find this to be a bad movie. Let's take a look at the difference here between the German poster. And part of this, what I'm saying here is, it's kind of an unprecedented film, as far as I can tell. So there aren't a lot of German horror films at this time. This is when Germany was actually West Germany and East Germany, so this is actually a West German film. There were not a lot of German horror films, and there were pretty much no sex comedies at all. So this is kind of a groundbreaking movie. So what kind of art do you put for that? Germany wasn't used to a lot of horror art at the time. If you look at other posters, like if you look at all the Hammer posters, they have like a similar vibe. If you look at other posters from the time, different areas have different vibes. If you remember, those Jean Rollin French vampire films had a totally different style of art than like most other places. So this is very unique. The poster is unique. The movie is unique. Here's this is actually the Australian poster. The English and American art I was finding was all like DVD art, so I wanted something older. That is the logo they use on the English version title screen. You can see it's a very different vibe here. This looks like it's exploitation, torture, vampire, something. It looks very different than this silly, goofy, lighthearted woman laying down with like bats like upper dress and downer dress. This, honestly, was not a cartoonish movie. So I don't know if this captures it properly, but it's probably closer than this. So anyway, I said it was put out by Aguila Films. It was, I should say, it was produced by Aguila Films. It was distributed in Germany by Constantin Films. Now, I don't know if I'm saying that right because I don't speak German. That's the current logo for Constantin. This is the 1964 era logo of Constantin. I don't know if you can tell there, but it's like almost the same exact logo, except for the film part. It's the same font. They kept it the same from the 60s till now. This is a current German production and distribution company. It is a large but independent German production and distribution company. I didn't look in to see if there are any larger ones in Germany, but this one is pretty big. It started out in 1941, which is interesting to me because that's the middle of World War II. World War II Germany starting up a new film company is like interesting to me. So they started in 1941. They're still going now. It started in Germany under Nazi times and then became part of West Germany, a West German company. Of course, now it's a German company. And they're very, from what I can tell, they're very popular in Germany. But here in the United States, they're most well known for producing the Resident Evil movies, which is interesting to me. So Resident Evil, if you're not aware, is a horror video game, and most video games. It came out for PlayStation 1. And so there were a whole bunch of Resident Evil games. They're very popular. Then they became popular movies. But it's a Japanese game, I believe. I'm not sure what company. Sony, I think, maybe Sony put out the game because they made PlayStation. But it's a Japanese game, very popular in the United States, probably very popular in Japan. So who makes the movie? Germany. So that's interesting to me. I haven't seen the Resident Evil movies because I don't watch a ton of movies from the last 20 years because they're full of CGI and other stuff I don't like. But that's a significant one, so I should probably watch it. So anyway, Constantin Films, known for making Resident Evil, which is a horror, but it's not a horror-based company. Anyway, they put this out. They did not put out Witches Torture Till They Bleed, but they did put out a ton of movies in Germany, like a ton of foreign movies. They distributed a ton of foreign movies in Germany. There are also some Italian films that we've talked about that were actually Italian-German co-productions, and Constantin put those out, like, for example, The Bird with the Crystal Plumage. Constantin put that out in Germany. The Cat o' Nine Tails, Constantin put that out in Germany. Dorian Gray, Constantin put that out in Germany. These are all Italian, primarily Italian films where you have mainly Italian cast and crew and director and all that, but they're actually partially produced, like co-produced by Germany, and then released by Constantin. So Constantin's been around, that's the point. There's actually a big distribution company. We haven't talked about it before because we haven't seen much German horror yet, but I thought that was worth talking about. So anyway, back to the movie. What is going on in this movie? Now, this movie is typically poorly reviewed, considered a bad movie by many. I would guess it's because it has goofy dubbing. Okay, the people in the movie, as what seems to be typical for the time period, are speaking English. You can tell by looking at their lips. They're speaking English. I guess a lot of European filmmakers figured they could make more money if they had English-speaking movies. But of course, their accents are probably so thick that they had to dub it all. And the whole horror comedy, sex comedy type thing was so unprecedented. I don't think they knew what kind of vibe to go for. So the dubbing has people speaking in like silly voices. It's very goofy. I don't think the humor went over well then, and I don't think the humor really goes over well now. But if you really analyze it and realize that this is such a unique movie, and then on top of that, Freddie Francis does a very good job. Like it was written by two German guys, so they wrote the story. But you can tell that, you know, it's hard to tell like how good the acting is when there's dubbing, but you can tell like by facial expressions and by movements and stuff, it's pretty good. It's filmed in an Austrian castle. It takes place in Transylvania and does have a connection to Dracula. Dracula appears at the end of the film as like, you know, a character. So what happens here, which is a little bit interesting, an American woman inherits this castle. In real life, it was really filmed in this Austrian castle. Did I say Austrian before or Australian? Obviously Austrian, since it's German speaking. So it's a German movie filmed in Austria that's set in Transylvania, which is part of Romania. So that's a little confusing. Anyway, an American woman who in reality is played by an Italian actress. Is her name up there? No. On this German poster, they don't put the names. Is her name up here? Pia Degermark, who's actually Italian, even though that sounds like a German last name. I think she was in a few German films. Maybe she lived in Germany, I forget. But she was an Italian woman. Maybe she was married to a German guy. Anyway, in the movie she plays an American, which is interesting that she's not playing an Italian. But I guess they, like, that goes along with them making the movie in English. Because, you know, Hollywood and America and all that. So she plays an American actress that inherits this castle because her relative passed away. She goes to Transylvania, to the castle. There is like a groundskeeper there who's afraid of her as soon as he sees her. And we find out that the reason that he's afraid is because she looks exactly like her ancestor who had been turned into a vampire. So the movie, well, I'm going to get into the plot, which because of the vibe of the movie, knowing the plot, it's not that deep of a plot, so knowing the plot is not going to ruin the movie for you. If you're interested, you could watch this and then watch that, or you could watch that and then come back and watch the rest of this. But for those of you who want to leave and see the movie for yourselves, I would give this a 7 out of 10. I want to explain why after I talk about what happens a little bit more. I would give it a 7 out of 10. If you can get past the dubbing goofiness, it's pretty good. So yeah, that's that. Anyway, the movie confused me as I was watching it, and it confuses the audience on purpose. It's not confusing because it's incoherent. It's not confusing because it's poorly written. It's confusing because there are multiple characters that look exactly the same. And so I've realized well into the movie, because they all have different hairstyles, I realized well into the movie that the same actress, Miss Pia here, plays the two main characters, both of them. So she plays the American actress who is the heir for this castle, and she also plays the actress's great-grandmother, who's a vampire, who looks to be the same exact age because she's a vampire and does not age. It's a little bit what I might have missed it, but I'm not sure who died in order to leave it to her. I think she mentioned an uncle. They don't talk about the uncle very much. So I guess her uncle died and he was the last living relative. The uncle doesn't come into play at all after. I guess he's a human that died, never turned into a vampire. Anyway, the vampire great-grandma is still living in the well, not living, but still residing in the castle. The groundskeeper is very afraid of her. He sleeps with garlic around his bed. He sleeps with a sword, like a sword that's like a holy sword or like a dagger. It's more like a dagger. And multiple times throughout the movie, the groundskeeper tries to stake the great grandma, and he keeps failing, which is it's a comedy, so I guess that makes sense. But anyway, Pia, the main actress, plays both parts, and at first the American woman is blonde, and the vampire, actually they show the vampire with like dirty blonde hair, but you can tell the hair's different, and you kind of think it's somebody different because she acts different. And then later they show the vampire with much whiter skin and totally jet black hair, and I guess that's like her true form. They didn't get into the fact, which I think this is probably points off here, but they didn't get into the fact why sometimes the vampire skin was pure white and sometimes like she looked like a regular person. So that's a little confusing. Also, I was pretty sure there were only two of them, the vampire and then the main woman, but then the hair kept changing. So they let you know about halfway through that the vampire wears a bunch of wigs so she can impersonate different people and seem like she's different people. And so between the fact that she's got different hair and you don't know it's different wigs until later, and the fact that you have the actress playing two separate people and one of the characters is pretending to be multiple different characters, multiple different people, it does make the film confusing, but like I said, it's on purpose. And so I think that the goal was to be confusing, and it achieved its goal, which right there tells me it's a good movie. It's also supposed to be silly, and it is. It's supposed to be funny, and like it depends on your sense of humor. The movie's 50 years old, so are we gonna think everything's as funny now as we did then, especially since it's from another country? Maybe not. I'm not a big comedy guy anyway, but I do like horror comedies. So I think it's a good movie. So I give it a 7 out of 10. The reason why it doesn't get a higher score is because the horror aspects are played down. Like if there wasn't a vampire that bites a couple people, there's not really much horror at all. As far as the comedy part, it's not hilarious to me. The other thing is I probably would have given it an 8, but in the final piece of the movie, Dracula hosts a party. Now Dracula wasn't in the movie the whole time. Then he shows up and he hosts a party / orgy. There is a lot of sex in the movie, which I did say it was a sex comedy. So there's a lot of sex in the movie. That's fine. No problem with that. He hosts an orgy. There's a bunch of naked vampires that came out of where did they all come from? I don't know. There's like no backstory on where all these vampires came from. Fine. We're in Transylvania, so there's a bunch. Also, Dracula arrives in a helicopter, which is obviously like supposed to be like comedic, so that's fine. But like the guy that dubbed the Dracula's voice is way too goofy, and a lot of like the movie's humor wasn't as absolutely ridiculous until the end. So the vibe changed at the end. Speaking of changing vibes, the opening music is really cool, and it has this like vocal music, which I kind of like. A lot of Jolly did that. A lot of Italian films did that. A lot of these Italian films were actually German co-produced. So in this whole like Italy, Germany, 70s era, we have a lot of scores that use women's voices as a musical instrument. There's no lyrics. And I have grown to really like that. So they do that in the beginning. They never do it again in the rest of the film. They do it in the opening credits, and then in the next scene they do it. And they have this like funny like thing where you hear these women's voices, but it's really the score. And it was cool, and they never did it again. In fact, most of the movie you do not notice any music at all. It's weird because in the first 10 minutes it's very prominent, and then it goes away. So that's kind of messed up. I don't like that it went away. So overall, I would say it's good. I did go back and watch a few Freddie Francis movies that I hadn't watched before. If you watch the Mumsy, Nanny, Sonny, and Girly video, you see me go through all of his previous films, and I had skipped a few, including The Deadly Bees and They Came From Outer Space and The Brain. So I went back and rewatched and gave those another shot. First of all, I can't watch The Brain. It is an adaptation of this book, Donovan's Brain. Donovan's Brain got made into a movie 3 times. One time it was made into a movie called Donovan's Brain in the 50s, and I watched that, and it was boring. And then I watched The Brain, and then I realized this is the same movie as Donovan's Brain, and I could not, and it was even more boring. So that's Freddie Francis's first solo film. No, second. Sorry, it's his second solo film, and I just could not put myself through that one. It's so boring. Then The Deadly Bees. The first time I tried to watch it, it was only available as a Mystery Science 3000 episode. I'm gonna say I hate Mystery Science Theater 3000. I like horror hosts. I don't mind when people make fun of the movie, but making fun of the movie over the movie, like, you do not get to experience the movie. I don't care like how bad it is. It completely changes the vibe. So I've seen a few movies that like people think are really bad. Well, it's because Mystery Science Theater 3000 ruined them. A main example is Beast in Haunted Cave. That is a great movie, a great monster slash bank heist slash skiing hybrid movie of the late 50s that is super underrated. And it seems that most people of today have only seen the Mystery Science Theater 3000 version of it, and they all say the movie's horrible. Of course it's horrible when you have cheap robot puppets like making fun of it through the entire movie. You're not gonna... frustrates me. Anyway, The Deadly Bees also got Mystery Science Theater 3000. And The Deadly Bees is not a great movie, but it's very watchable. Like, the acting is good. The bees look like crap, which is why, it's kind of a bad movie. But when you have the robots like talking over the entire thing, it sucks. But when you just watch it by itself, if you kind of ignore the fact that like the bee aspect sucks and the movie's called Deadly Bees, like the rest of it's good. It's an Amicus movie that feels like a cool 60s movie with good acting. It's just that the bees look like garbage. Then he did They Came From Beyond Space, which is a sci-fi action, like James Bond spy type comedy. That one kind of misses the mark. That's not a good movie, I don't think. Especially when there's a movie about an alien invasion and the aliens just look like humans. I hate that. The aliens are made of pure energy and they like invade the mind of and the body of human beings. Like, that's boring. That means you just couldn't make an alien. All right. So anyway, I did catch up on my Freddie Francis movies. That's my point. And so compared to those movies and compared to Trog, which was the previous one, I think this movie is very good. It's better than some of the other Freddie Francis output. That's my point. So this is probably one of his absolute most obscure movies. I do recommend you see it. I feel that it's important for being a very early sex comedy and a very early horror sex comedy, possibly the first one. So I would say check it out. It may or may not be bootlegged on YouTube right now, or you can find a better copy if you look around. There are fairly decent copies out there. They did make a DVD of it, so you could pick it up. All right, see you next time.